What happens when one of the most famous princes in the world goes head-to-head with a late-night television host and completely loses control? In just 34 seconds, a casual joke turned into the most shocking meltdown ever captured on live television, ending with security dragging a royal out of the studio. It started like any other night on the show. The audience was buzzing with excitement. Prince Harry was the guest everyone wanted to see. He walked out onto the stage with that signature smile, waving to the crowd as they cheered. Jimmy Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, extended his hand, and the two shook hands like old friends. "Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here," Jimmy said, his voice warm and friendly. "Thanks for having me. Happy to be here," Harry replied, settling into the guest chair. The interview began smoothly enough. They talked about California weather, about adjusting to life in America, and about the differences between British and American culture. The audience laughed at all the right moments. Everything seemed perfectly fine. Then Jimmy decided to lighten the mood with a joke. A simple, harmless joke that he had probably told 100 times before with other guests. He leaned back in his chair, grinning at Harry, and said, "So I gotta ask, do you ever miss the fancy dinners at the palace? Because I've seen pictures of those things. They look incredible. Here in America, our idea of a fancy dinner is when we use the good paper plates." The audience laughed. It was a classic Jimmy Kimmel joke. Self-deprecating, silly, harmless. But Harry's face changed. His smile disappeared. His jaw tightened. He stared at Jimmy for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Sorry, what are you trying to say exactly?" Harry asked, his voice suddenly cold. Jimmy blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I'm just saying, palace food probably beats takeout, right? Just a joke." "A joke," Harry repeated, his tone dripping with something that sounded like contempt. "You think my life is a joke?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the energy in the room shift. Jimmy sat up straighter, his smile becoming more forced, more professional. No, I was just making a light joke about fancy dinners versus, regular dinners. Nothing about your life," Jimmy explained, trying to steer things back on track. But Harry was not letting it go. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked on Jimmy. "You people in the media, you always do this. You always think you can just say whatever you want about me, about my family, about my choices. You think it's all just entertainment." "I really didn't mean anything by it," Jimmy said, his voice calm but firm. "It was just a joke about food. That's all." "That's all," Harry mocked, his voice rising slightly. "It's never just anything with you people, is it? It's always some dig. Why, some little comment designed to make me look ridiculous." Jimmy glanced at his producers off camera, then back at Harry. The host was clearly trying to figure out how to handle this situation. He had dealt with difficult guests before, but this was different. This was escalating fast. "Look, I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot here," Jimmy said, his tone diplomatic. "Why don't we talk about something else? I heard you've been doing some great charity work lately." "Oh, how generous of you," Harry snapped. "Now you want to talk about my charity work? Now that you've had your little laugh at my expense?" The audience was completely silent now. People were shifting in their seats, uncomfortable. This was not the fun, lighthearted interview they had signed up for. Jimmy took a breath. "I apologize if my joke offended you. That genuinely was not my intention. I make jokes about everything. I make jokes about myself all the time. It's what I do. It's comedy." "Comedy," Harry said, practically spitting the word. "You want to talk about comedy? You know what's funny? A talk show host who thinks he's clever making jokes about people he knows nothing about." "I think you're overreacting a bit here," Jimmy said, and you could hear a slight edge creeping into his voice now. He was trying to stay professional, but Harry was pushing him. "Overreacting?" Harry stood up from his chair. "You invite me onto your show. You disrespect me on live television, and I'm overreacting? Jimmy stood up too, holding his hands up in a peaceful gesture. Nobody disrespected you. I made a joke about palace dinners. That's it. I've made the same kind of joke about the White House, about fancy restaurants, about my own terrible cooking. It's not personal. Everything is personal when it comes to me. Don't you understand that? Harry shouted. The audience gasped. This was really happening. Every joke, every comment, every single word that comes out of your mouths gets analyzed and twisted and used against me. Then maybe you shouldn't have come on a comedy show, Jimmy said, his patience clearly wearing thin. This is what we do here. We joke. We laugh. We have fun. If you can't handle that, I don't know what to tell you. Harry's face turned red. How dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am? And there it was. The moment that would be replayed, over and over again. The moment that showed everyone watching exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Jimmy stared at Harry for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but firm. Yeah, I know who you are. You're a guest on my show who's acting incredibly rude over a harmless joke. That's who you are right now. Rude? Harry's voice went up another notch. You want to see rude? I'll show you rude. You're a pathetic little man with a pathetic little show, making pathetic little jokes because you have nothing else to offer. You're not funny. You're not clever. You're just another media parasite feeding off people like me. The audience was stunned. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others were looking around, unsure if this was some kind of planned bit. But the look on Jimmy's face made it clear. This was very, very real. Okay, Jimmy said, his voice ice cold now. I've tried to be nice. I've tried to be understanding. I apologized for a joke that shouldn't have needed an apology. But I'm not going to stand here and let you insult me, insult my show, and insult my staff. I think it's time for you to leave. You're kicking me out? Harry laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. You're actually kicking me out? Yes, I am, Jimmy said firmly. This is my show, my studio, and I'm asking you to leave. This is unbelievable, Harry said, looking around at the audience as if seeking support. But the faces looking back at him were not sympathetic. They were shocked, uncomfortable, and in some cases actually angry on Jimmy's behalf. Security! Jimmy called out, still maintaining his composure even though you could see the tension in his shoulders. 2 large security guards appeared from backstage. Harry looked at them, then back at Jimmy, then at the audience. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually calm down, like he might realize how badly he was behaving. But instead, then he doubled down. You'll regret this, Harry said, pointing at Jimmy. Do you have any idea what kind of connections I have? What kind of power I have? I can destroy you with a single phone call. Jimmy actually laughed at that. Not a mean laugh, but a genuinely amused one. Is that a threat? Are you actually threatening me right now? It's not a threat. It's a promise, Harry said. You think you can humiliate me like this and get away with it? I'm not humiliating you, Jimmy said, his voice rising for the first time. You're doing that all by yourself. I made a joke about palace dinners. You turned it into this. You're the one who started yelling, who started insulting everyone, who started making threats. That's all you, buddy. The security guards moved closer to Harry. One of them said something quietly to him, probably asking him to come with them peacefully. Get your hands off me, Harry snapped at the guard, even though the guard had not actually touched him. Don't you dare touch me. Sir, we need you to leave the studio, the guard said calmly. I'm not going anywhere until this hack apologizes to me, Harry said, gesturing wildly at Jimmy. Jimmy crossed his arms over his chest. I already apologized once for something I didn't need to apologize for. I'm not doing it again. You came on my show as a guest. I welcomed you warmly. I asked you normal questions. I made a completely innocent joke that I've made countless times before. Yeah, and you lost your mind. That's not on me. That's on you. You smug, arrogant little man, Harry seethed. You sit here behind your desk every night, mocking people, tearing them down, and you think you're some kind of hero? You think people actually like you? You know what? Jimmy said, walking around his desk to face Harry directly. Yeah, I make jokes. That's my job. But I make jokes about everyone equally. I make jokes about politicians, celebrities, myself, my wife, my kids. I make jokes because laughter is good for people. It helps them cope with the world. But I've never, not once, treated a guest the way you're treating me right now. I've had presidential candidates on this show. I've had actual royalty on this show. I've had some of the biggest stars in the world sit in that chair, and not one of them acted like this. Because they're all scared of you, Harry shot back. They're all scared of what you'll say about them if they don't play along with your little games. Or maybe, Jimmy said, his voice steady and strong, they're just decent human beings who know how to take a joke and have a conversation without throwing a tantrum. That word, tantrum. You could see it hit Harry like a physical blow. His face went even redder. His hands clenched into fists. How dare you, he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. Sir, you need to come with us now, the security guard said, more firmly this time. I'm not going anywhere, Harry insisted. Not until he takes it back. Not until he apologizes properly. Jimmy shook his head slowly. I've got nothing to take back, and I'm definitely not apologizing. You want to act like a spoiled child? That's your choice. But you're doing it off my stage. The security guards moved in then, one on each side of Harry. They did not grab him roughly or manhandle him, but they made it clear that he was leaving one way or another. This is assault, Harry yelled. You're all witnessing assault. I'll sue every single one of you. Nobody's assaulting you, Jimmy said tiredly. You're being escorted out because you can't behave like an adult. As the guards started to guide Harry toward the exit, he kept yelling, You're finished, Kimmel. You hear me? Finished. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. I'll tell everyone what you did. I'll go on every show, every podcast, every interview, and I'll tell them all what kind of person you really are. Jimmy just stood there, watching Harry being led away. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. You do that, and while you're at it, maybe think about what kind of person you showed everyone tonight. Harry tried to pull away from the guards, but they held him steady. Let go of me. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea who you're touching right now? Yeah, we know who you are, one of the guards said quietly. And right now, you're someone who needs to leave. As they reached the edge of the stage, Harry turned back one more time. You'll pay for this, Kimmel. I promise you that. You'll pay. And then he was gone, dragged off the stage, still shouting, still threatening, still completely unable to accept that he had brought this entirely on himself. Jimmy stood there for a moment in the silence that followed. The audience did not know what to do. Should they clap? Should they stay quiet? The whole thing had been so surreal, so unexpected, that nobody knew how to react. Finally, Jimmy walked back to his desk. He sat down, looked directly at the camera, and said, Well, that was something. I genuinely don't know what just happened. I made a joke about fancy dinners. That was it. Just a silly joke about food. And it turned into, well, you all saw what it turned into. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm still processing what had just occurred. I've been doing this job for a long time. I've interviewed thousands of people, and I've never, ever had someone react like that to such an innocent comment. I apologized. I tried to move on. I tried to be understanding. But at a certain point, you have to stand up for yourself and your team, and that's what I did. The audience started to clap then, slowly at first, then building into genuine applause. They were on Jimmy's side. Anyone watching could see that he had handled the situation with as much grace and professionalism as possible given the circumstances. I want to be clear about something, Jimmy continued. I have nothing against this person personally. I invited him on the show in good faith. I wanted to have a nice conversation. I wanted the audience to enjoy themselves. But I'm not going to be spoken to like that. I'm not going to let anyone come onto this stage and insult me, insult my crew, make threats, and act like they're above basic human decency just because of who they are or what family they come from. More applause. Louder this time. And you know what the craziest part is? Jimmy said, a slight smile finally returning to his face. The joke wasn't even that good. It was a throwaway line about palace food versus takeout. That's it. I've made way better jokes that got way less reaction. But sometimes, I guess, it's not about the joke itself. It's about someone looking for a reason to be offended, looking for a reason to lash out, and latching onto the first thing they can find. He looked down at his notes, then back up at the camera. We had a whole interview planned. We were going to talk about all sorts of interesting stuff. But instead, we got whatever that was. And honestly, I think it showed people something important. It showed that it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter how famous you are. If you can't treat people with basic respect, if you can't handle a simple joke without exploding, then you're going to have problems. And those problems are your own fault. The audience cheered. They were completely behind Jimmy now. He had remained calm, professional, and reasonable throughout the entire ordeal. He had tried to de-escalate multiple times. He had apologized even when he did not need to. And when Harry continued to act out, Jimmy had done what any person should do. He stood his ground and refused to be mistreated. I want to thank my security team, Jimmy said, nodding toward the side of the stage. Those guys handled that perfectly. They were professional, they were calm, and they did their jobs. Let's give them a round of applause. The audience clapped enthusiastically. The security guards, still standing off to the side, nodded in acknowledgement. So, this puts us in a weird spot, Jimmy said, checking his watch. We've still got time left in the show, but our main guest just got escorted out by security after having a complete meltdown. That's a first for us. I literally don't have a backup plan for this situation because I never thought it would happen. He laughed, and the audience laughed with him. The tension was finally starting to break. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a kind of collective disbelief at what everyone had just witnessed. You know what? Let's bring out the band, Jimmy said. Let's play some music. Let's remind ourselves that most people, the vast majority of people, are actually pretty nice and can handle being on a talk show without threatening the host. The band started playing, and Jimmy stood up from his desk again. He walked to the front of the stage and addressed the audience directly. I want to say something to all of you, he began. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for witnessing that. Because I'm sure there are going to be people out there who try to spin this, who try to make it seem like I was in the wrong somehow. But you were here. You saw the whole thing. You saw me make a harmless joke. You saw him overreact. You saw me try to calm things down. You saw him escalate. You saw me apologize. You saw him get worse. And you saw me finally say enough is enough. People in the audience were nodding. Some were even calling out words of support. And that's all I wanted, Jimmy continued. Just to be treated with the same respect I show my guests. That's it. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't care if you're a prince or a president or the most famous person in the world. When you come on my show, we treat each other like human beings. We laugh together. We talk. We connect. That's the whole point. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But tonight, we learned that some people just can't do that. Some people are so wrapped up in themselves, so convinced of their own importance, that they can't handle even the gentlest ribbing. And when those people show you who they really are, you should believe them. The applause was deafening now. Jimmy had turned what could have been a disaster into a moment of genuine connection with his audience. He had been tested in front of everyone, and he had passed with flying colors. All right, he said, waving his hands to quiet the crowd. Let's get back to why we're all really here. To have a good time. To forget about our problems for a little while. To laugh. That's what this show is supposed to be about. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let one person's bad attitude ruin that for the rest of us. The band kicked into an upbeat song, and Jimmy started to dance a little, encouraging the audience to clap along. The mood in the studio completely shifted. What had been tense and uncomfortable was now celebratory. The audience felt like they were part of something, like they had collectively witnessed something important and come out the other side. When the music ended, Jimmy was smiling genuinely again. "We're going to take a quick break," he said. "When we come back, I'm going to tell you some stories about other awkward moments I've had on this show. And trust me, I've had plenty, but none, and I mean none, quite like what just happened. We'll be right back." The cameras cut away, and during the commercial break, you could hear the audience buzzing with conversation. Everyone was talking about what they had just seen. Some people were on their phones, probably already texting friends and family about the incident. Others were just sitting there, still processing. When they came back from the break, Jimmy launched into a series of stories about other difficult guests he had dealt with over the years. But he told the stories with humor, with grace, with the understanding that everyone has bad days sometimes. He did not name names. He did not trash talk anyone. He just shared funny anecdotes that reminded everyone that live television is unpredictable, and that's part of what makes it exciting. But throughout the rest of the show, there was an elephant in the room, or rather, an elephant that had been escorted from the room by security. Every joke Jimmy made seemed to carry a little extra weight now. Every time he laughed, the audience laughed harder, as if trying to show their support for him. As the show wound down, Jimmy did his usual thank yous. He thanked the band, he thanked his producers, he thanked the audience for being there. And then, right at the end, he said something that would become one of the most quoted lines from the entire incident. Before we go, I just want to say one more thing about what happened earlier. I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret asking that person to leave. And I don't regret making that joke about palace dinners, because it was funny, and it was harmless. What I do regret is that someone who has such a big platform, who has the ability to do so much good in the world, chose to spend his time on my show acting like a bully. That's sad. That's really, really sad. But it's not my problem to fix. I just host a late-night talk show. I tell jokes, I make people laugh, and tomorrow night, I'll be back here doing the same thing. Not because one person's tantrum is not going to change who I am or what this show is about. The audience gave him a standing ovation. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Some were even wiping away tears. Jimmy had articulated exactly what everyone was feeling. He had been wronged, but he had not let it break him. He had been attacked, but he had not attacked back. He had simply stood his ground and refused to be treated poorly. "Good night, everyone," Jimmy said, waving to the crowd. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting this show. And remember, be kind to each other out there. It's really not that hard." The credits rolled, the band played, and Jimmy Kimmel walked off his stage with his head held high, knowing that he had handled one of the most difficult situations of his career with dignity and class.